Welcome to Proverbs 7. So let's start by reading. My son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them as on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend, to keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. For at the window of my house I have looked out through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple. I have perceived among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. And behold, the woman meets him dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward, her feet do not stay at home, now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with bold face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I have paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, colored linens from Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him. At full moon he will come home. With much seductive speech she persuades him, and with her smooth talk she compels him. All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast till an arrow pierces its liver. As a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life. And now, O sons, listen to me, and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. So we've got several actors here. We have the son, who is the one being taught. We have the young man, really. It's not the son who is the character in this play. It's the young man. We have the woman, her husband, and I think that's it. So yeah, the young woman, the young man, the woman, and her husband. The assignment that I had posted, the thing to think about ahead of time, is what fences could each of these people have erected to compensate for their weaknesses? Temptations aren't arbitrary. We are tempted by the things that we have weaknesses for. The enemy doesn't come at somebody who doesn't care about material things and tempts them with fancy clothes. Not what he does. He doesn't come after an old man and tempts him with sex and prostitutes, at least not most old men, because they're just not as vulnerable to that. Instead, he comes after young men. He attacks a woman who is left home alone for extended periods of times with temptations to stray. What they don't leave out is her husband is also away on a business trip with lots of money with him. What temptations is he facing? So what can each of these people do to protect themselves, to compensate for the weaknesses that they must know that they have?
I think one thing that really struck out to me just across the board is that all of them were outside of accountability within community. Mm-hmm. He was by himself on the corner. She was outside of her house on the corner. The husband was gone. So none of them were functionally surrounded by people who would say, hey, dudes, bad idea. Mm-hmm. They were putting themselves in a position where their weaknesses could be, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Their weaknesses could be fed. Those mm-hmm. desires could be, they had that sort of the anonymity. And I think of, how that is such a thing that when you have a community of people around you and they see you tripping and falling, it's really hard to hide it if you're an actual community. If you're surrounded by strangers, that's a totally different thing entirely. Why did the woman not have a household of servants or children or something? Because obviously he left with a bag of money. They weren't destitute.
Yep. She's got lots of materials to tempt people with.
Right. And the young man, obviously more than likely the town he lives, where were his people that in the dark, in the evening, he should have been with? Because if he was busy all day, the likelihood of being out and about carousing in the evening is considerably less. So where were the people that it would have been wiser for him to be with? Where is this woman's sisters? Anyway, it just kind of all came down to where's their community and why didn't they have people near them to help them walk through life?
Yeah, having people around is important, especially the right kind of people. One of the things that's happening here is that, she goes out to this particular corner, and it sounds like she has a habit of going to this corner because it's her corner. And he's not just walking past, he's walking past at twilight and then after dark and then in the deep dark of night. So he keeps going past. And it sounds like they're both looking for trouble. And if you're around people who are themselves avoiding trouble, you have a natural accountability, even if there's nothing formal going on. You've got people around you that you don't want to be shamed in front of. And so you don't behave in ways that they would perceive as shameful.
Yeah, if you're a young dude with a bunch of your friends and Mrs. Robinson comes out and slaps a big wet one on your face, you're going to be kind of embarrassed in front of all your cool young friends.
Depends on the friends, but yeah.
That's what I'm saying. If they're decent human beings, if they're decent human beings who do study Torah, who may still be immature and ridiculous, but they have a standard, that an external standard that may not yet be internalized, but they do have that external standard. It's like, oh, this is not okay.
Yeah. What about the husband? He does not have a good relationship with his wife. He doesn't really know who she is. And if he did, he might rearrange his business affairs. He might send out, his personal Eliezer out there to do whatever it is he's gone to do instead of himself. Or maybe he'd go get counseling, or maybe he'd have his mother-in-law move in with them. I mean, not everybody wants that, but if it prevents these kinds of problems, it might be worth it in the long run. Maybe he's not teaching his family the way that he should. It doesn't really sound like he has children, but it's hard to tell. I mean, if they do have servants, maybe they're watching the kids and she's just out on her, doing her thing. But if that's the case, he doesn't have trustworthy servants either. So he's mismanaging his household on multiple levels. He's left his wife home alone for extended periods of time. I mean, no matter how trustworthy she is, that's not a good way to be married. Cultivating relationships takes time and it takes personal attention. Once in a while, if you need to leave, that's fine. But if you do that on a regular basis, which it kind of sounds like he does, that's going to cause problems. Your relationship is going to suffer, and those pain points are going to create temptations for people where they didn't exist before.
I think it's important to note that it says that she's a foreign woman. And that, typically they were told not to marry foreign women, Ruth being an exception, Rahab, but that they were told not to, I guess if she would have, it in verse 5, I have the Tree of Life version. They will keep you from a seducing woman, from the foreign woman with her seductive speech.
Yeah, I just wanted to see what the Hebrew words there. Yeah, the word is nokri. I was looking for something obvious about that word, but I don't know what the implications might be. Because frequently when it talks about the stranger, it doesn't necessarily mean a foreigner. It could mean just somebody who's not part of your group. Somebody from the next town over or something like that, just an outsider. But looking at the Brown Driver Briggs dictionary, it seems like this is pretty much foreigner. Foreigner, alien, foreign woman.
Jacinius also says that it's also the word that is kindred to the idea of turning aside or departing. So it potentially could be someone who has turned away from Torah or turned away from Israel in their practice.
Yeah, the ESV just translates that phrase adulteress. That's the implication, but it may not be exactly what was intended. Some other thoughts about the young man. Yeah, this chapter starts out with the father saying to meditate on his words. Keep them in your heart, meditate on them. Bind them on your hand. It reminds me of Paul's advice to be in prayer at all times. I don't remember the exact phrase, but and it doesn't mean walking around praying, lips moving, or chanting Our Father, or say anything like that. He's talking about having a prayerful attitude at all times, always being meditating on the word, meditating on God, like what would God want me to do in these circumstances, always seeing the world through a lens of God's commandments and Yeshua's teachings. And I think if you are deliberately meditating on positive and righteous thoughts, it's always more difficult to act wickedly. It's not always possible to have righteous thoughts at the front of your mind, but it does discourage the wicked thoughts. Walking past that corner was probably a bad idea. He could avoid places and circumstances where he knows that there are temptations. It seemed like he was idle. If he had been focused on his business, getting to where he needed to be, and then coming home, or just avoiding that neighborhood, that would have helped him. Just being aware of what your own weaknesses are, and what kinds of things are going to tempt you, and what the consequences of giving into those temptations are, is helpful. Although when you are strongly tempted by something, frequently the consequences aren't in your thoughts. Another thing that he could be doing is watching for characteristics in the people around him. It seems like she was looking for somebody of a particular type. She's got her radar tuned to a particular type of guy, and she's going to ignore all the others in general. Unless there's nobody else around. And he can do the same kind of thing. Look for a particular type of person and avoid this one and be around that one. And in this case, it seems like he was deliberately trying to be around the wrong kind. And if you're not willing to put up those fences, there's not a lot anybody else can do. If you want to sin, you're going to. What about the woman? What things could she have done to minimize her temptation?
Stay home.
I was muted, but I said the same thing, Heidi. Stay home, barefoot, and pregnant.
It does
exactly.
help.
Yeah, I think she
hard to get in trouble that way.
Not impossible, but harder.
She could have refrained from setting a trap for the man. Yeah, to me, I'm looking at the scenario, and you can basically see in modern terminology that they're both looking for a hookup.
Mm-hmm.
They just want something, for a night with no strings attached, and that is much more of a profound problem with our society today than I like to think about, or that I'm really very conscious of. But
Mm-hmm.
they've got various different apps that you can utilize to just connect with somebody for whatever your thing is that you're looking for. And
Mm-hmm.
so I see this proverb in general is more applicable today than I think ever in my lifetime. It's just more in a general cultural societal way. The wisdom there, I think, is really needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no shame in our culture, or very little. And shame is a really important thing. I think for decades, even churches really downplayed the idea of shame. Like, you shouldn't feel ashamed. Jesus has taken away all your shame. Well, that's true if you've repented. You don't need to be ashamed of the things that you did before you repented, but you do need to be ashamed of the things you keep doing. If we had a more appropriate sense of shame in our culture, I think a lot of these things could be avoided. You know, with these people and everybody in real life, once you get to the point where you have decided that you want to give in to temptation, it's too late to start building fences. You have to do it ahead of time. And so the idea, the awareness that you're going to experience shame if you do this thing and other people find out, that gives you an excuse to start building fences before you get to that point. So if she knows that if she's home alone and her husband is gone on a lengthy trip, that she's going to be tempted to go out to this corner and pick up some strange guy, well, she knows when he's getting ready to leave that that's going to be a problem. So before he leaves, before she feels the pressure of that temptation, she could be inviting somebody to come stay with her. You know, my husband's going to be away. You know, my sister, she should come stay with me for a couple of weeks. Or, you know, her mother can come stay with her, something. I don't know who, you know, or what. For him, instead of going out on this business trip alone, maybe he should take his wife with him if that's a practical thing to do. He probably does have servants and other people with him. You know, a man with lots of money is not going to be traveling alone. But traveling with people that you know and that are close to you, your peers especially, is going to be more of a deterrent to temptation than people who work for you, because you're not accountable to them. And you can say, all right, you guys stay here. I'm going to go take care of business over there. But if you know that's going to be a problem, then take your business partner, take your brother or your father or your sons, take them with you, because you're going to feel more shame if they find out about what you did than if your servants do. And I think the same thing with her. She may have servants at home, but those aren't going to be a huge deterrent to her temptations. Her sister or her mother or her best friend might be, as long as she's got quality friends. But you have to do those things. You have to put up those fences before they're needed, because once they're needed, you know, the cows have already left the pasture.
I think that part of it too is that it says in verse 10, all of a sudden a woman meets him dressed as a prostitute with a cunning heart. So one of the ways that I wrote for her to build fences around herself would be to cultivate a soft heart. If she knows that she can talk herself into behaviors that are cunning and she wants to be different, then she should do the things which would cultivate the opposite in herself. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily have a across the board answer for what that is. Gratitude is a great way, you know, focusing on the things that you're thankful for, being mindful, serving others in real ways can be super helpful in softening your own heart, helping those who are in need rather than focusing on your own needs, that kind of thing. You know, studying Torah, knowing, you know, what is right. If she is a foreign woman, let's say she is a foreigner and she doesn't know the way that it's right, well, that's kind of up to her husband to make sure she is, especially in that culture, receiving instruction or having opportunities. And primarily that, you know, he should be leading by example. But then I also just put, don't go out at night and kiss gullible men, then invite them home to have sex with them. And, you know, just don't do it.
Don't do that.
Yeah, it's not a good idea.
But then it was like, that is literally the cardinal right of feminism.
Mm-hmm.
That is the thing that they are fighting for. And I'm just like, wow. I think Brian's right. I don't know that there's been a time in a long time where this passage has been more appropriate.
Yeah, I think I was on the same train of thought as you, because I'm thinking about it in terms of like our modern culture. You know, I think about like a woman who's maybe home because her husband's out and away. You know, first you have if the relationship's not really secure, which is very possible given the circumstances, there's what's he doing when he's gone? That tendency to be tempted to think something might be going on with him, and then think like modern life would be, oh, well, if he gets to go do that, then maybe, I can go do this. Or the idea that she doesn't have anything better to do, like what you were talking about, like occupying herself with higher pursuits. A lot of times people in our modern day will, be left at home and be like, well, what am I going to do when that person's gone? And just start thinking about like all the things they could do, that they could possibly do. And, if they have certain friends, or even if they don't have any friends, but they're trying to figure out like, how do I alleviate this problem I have? They could end up, at the club or wherever, like those places that all kinds of things happen. And if they go to that place, they're going to dress like the people in that place, and they're going to do all the things that are appropriate. For example, like, I'm going to go to Vegas next month, and the last place I really want to be on the planet is Vegas. But I'm going for a conference, and I'm like, oh, if we go somewhere for dinner, because my boss, like from the lab company, wants to take us all out to dinner. I'm like, should I dress like I'm in Vegas? And then I'm like, no, I don't want to dress like that. But then I also don't want to stick out like a sore thumb, and like just stupid things like that come to mind. But I'm thinking, okay, I have to do something that is appropriate to some extent, but not like everybody else. Like maybe I'll wear a sparkly shirt, like it's kind of that idea of like, she's showing up in a place where obviously there are prostitutes. And so she's dressing like a prostitute. And it's not because she hadn't thought it through. She really thought it through. She knew what she was going to do too. But I just think there's a lot that goes into that, the being swayed by the cultural norms, that I think is partly playing into this too, of the culture, that whether she came from a culture like that, which might be the case, or whether she's just going to a place where that's the culture. I don't know.
It really does come down to what is in your heart, and the kind of person that you have decided that you want to be. We have the benefit of the Holy Spirit that empowers us to be better than our fallen natures would dictate. But even in the world, people make decisions all the time to be a better version of themselves. We have the capacity to choose to a certain degree. And then, as believers and followers of Yeshua, we have a responsibility as well. And I think that's one of the differences. But I think that it is super empowering to say you have the freedom to make different choices. None of them accidentally fell into that. I know a friend of mine got pregnant in high school, and I was like, what in the world? She goes, it just happened. It was an accident. I'm like, at 16, I knew better, but it was, there was not thoughtfulness involved. And that was, a lack of thoughtfulness on everybody's part to be concerned about the well-being of the other person. This is a person within Israel. If they were caught committing adultery, they're both dead.
Yeah.
She didn't care about that. He didn't care about that. The husband is gone, and he didn't set boundaries or safeguards for her.
I think that's a really, really big issue. Is she wasn't thinking, and he wasn't thinking, neither one of them were thinking about the consequences of their actions for the other person. Maybe they were thinking about it and just didn't care. And I think all of this really boils down to, do you want to do what's right or not? Or do you want to do what's wrong? If you want to do what's wrong, there's nothing anybody else is going to do about it. You're going to do what's wrong. Mm-hmm. But if you do want to do the right thing, then there are steps you can take.
Yeah, and everything that she says, every last thing that she just continues to say in that stretch of verses is like, there's no thought at all, except when she's like straight out saying, my husband's not home. But there's really no thought about like, my marriage is important to me. There's no indication at all that she sees her marriage in the way that I believe that we're supposed to hold our marriage, in the way that we're supposed to honor the marriage and one another. And so there's a lack of real commitment or understanding of what that's really about.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe because she's a foreigner, maybe she doesn't really understand it. And maybe she's gone along with the whole thing on the surface, but doesn't really have a real regard or understanding at a deep level. And so she's just like, really doesn't matter. And we see that today. I mean, we see that today a lot in a culture that is not accepting of God's design for relationships between men and women. And I can be married, but it's really only as long as it's convenient for me. Whether the consequences were different then in that culture, or there aren't as many consequences in the culture that we live in terms of, possible death. There's a lot of death that goes on around marriages that are broken, all kids that are, damaged by that, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
It goes on and on.
Yeah, it's just there's more distance between the
Yes.
lightning and the thunderclap. So people aren't making the connection. Or if they do, it's only with their therapist 20 years later.
I think too is that the example that's used here, there's nowhere in the history of humanity, in a reasonable society, where committing adultery was ever a really great idea. I don't know of any culture that was like, hey, everybody, I mean, there have been some tribal cultures where there's the whole wife sharing and all that, but I'm talking about, reasonably healthy societies that are upwardly moving or developing or whatever, where adultery has ever been like, hey, this is a great way to spend your time. Excellent use of your resources. And so it's a really obvious one. And yet it is, again, because of the nature of sexual immorality, it has to be said over and over again, because somehow every generation thinks that maybe we're the ones who get that right. It's kind of like socialism that way. We're the ones to get it right. And if we're doing it, I have had friends in the past who have just said, if your marriage isn't making you happy, you deserve happiness more than anything. You do whatever it is that makes you happy. And if it's not your husband, if it's not your family, then you just got to go out there and find that thing that makes you happy. And I remember at one point being a young married woman, thinking to myself as we were struggling that how would it make me happy to destroy my home? That doesn't make me, I may not be happy over here. I am struggling, but I'm not going to be happier with the destruction of my home and my family and my children. That's not going to make me happier. That there's got to be something better. And, what the Lord really worked in me was just an attitude of thankfulness and humility to see that maybe I wasn't happy because I wasn't being the person that God wanted me to be, not because Brian was a big fat failure.
Yeah, I think having children should give people perspective. This text doesn't really talk about how old this woman or husband or we only have some idea of the young man. Presumably she's fairly young, but if she had children and she was thinking about her children's future, in a culture like this one, especially where they'd be thinking of their children's future marriage prospects from the day they were born, I would expect people to have more thought about how is what I'm doing today going to affect my child's future? And what if this other person was my child? How would I want someone else behaving towards my child? And, people talk like that now. Like, would you want a guy like you hanging out with your daughter? Those kinds of things. I don't know how much that actually affects people, but it certainly should. I would like to think that it would affect people more than it does. But not having children, that takes away a lot of that opportunity to even think of life that way. You can do it theoretically, but until you actually have children under your care that are your responsibility, I don't think that anybody can really grasp that responsibility. Okay, well, there was another aspect of this chapter that I wanted to bring out, and that's that especially between this chapter and the previous one, there are a lot of things that we can see about how foolishness and wisdom are contrasted. Going back to verse 5, to keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. So wisdom speaks a certain way. Like you say to wisdom, you are my sister, and you call insight your intimate friend, but you don't flatter wisdom. So there's flattery versus truth. The wise person is straightforward. I think that's the way the previous chapter described it, that this person is you can be complex, but uncomplicated. Like you get what you see, or you see what you get, however that goes. But the wise person isn't trying to use their words to trick anybody into anything. They're not lying to you to get you to do things that aren't in your best interest. They're telling you the truth and helping you to judge the facts so that you can make decisions in your own best interests. And then in verse 7, I have seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths, a man lacking sense. The fool, or the adulteress in this case, but it's, she is a fool. She targets the vulnerable. She's looking for people who have weaknesses that fit her. I don't want to call them strengths, but the weapons that she's using. Versus wisdom, who defends the weak, who stands up for people. They're both looking for people's vulnerabilities. One is looking to take advantage of them. One is looking to help the other person compensate for them or to eliminate them. And in verses 7 through 9, seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. So foolishness is looking for opportunities to stray, whereas wisdom is looking for opportunities to learn, to become more. It's subtracting from yourself versus adding to yourself. And not just yourself, but the people around you too. Looking for opportunities to make the people around you better, or looking for opportunities to break them, to take things away from them. Okay, in verse 10, and behold, the woman meets him dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. So once she's found somebody with the vulnerability that she can target, she actively tries to tempt other people into sinning. Whereas the voice of wisdom calls people to repentance. They're both out there on the street calling to people. Just what are they saying? One is saying, hey, come over here. I've got some goodies for you. And the other one is saying, hey, don't go over there. That's going to hurt you. And that really goes back to the flattery versus truth. Although in this case, it's not necessarily flattering the target of the temptation, but flattering the thing that tempts them, like making it look better than it really is, hiding its flaws, hiding the consequences of what's going to happen if you follow that path. Also in verse 10, scheming versus sincerity and faithfulness, looking for ways to manipulate people and to maneuver them into doing what you want them to do, versus laying out the truth and the facts before them and letting them make decisions, and doing the same for yourself, being honest with yourself about what's going to happen if you go down a certain path. In verse 11, she is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. The foolish woman is clamorous. She's loud and obnoxious. She's in your face. Whereas wisdom is at the corners and standing on the high places along the roadside, but she's not in the road getting in your face. She's calling out to people saying, hey, come over here. I've got something to teach you. Whereas the foolish woman, the adulteress, is getting right down there in your face saying, hey, come over here and rubbing your nose in the thing that she knows is going to tempt you. Headstrong versus meek, determined to make other people bow to your will or to listen to your words, versus standing to the side and inviting people to listen, but not running them down, not chasing them. Leave that up to God later when they don't listen to wisdom. Straying versus home focused in verses 11 and 12. Now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. Wisdom is also on the street corners and in the market, but she's not there lying at wait. She's there during the market hours, doing business and inviting people to learn and experience the positive sides of the world. And then she goes home when that time is done. Whereas the foolish woman is probably at home when she ought to be out in the market doing the business of her household, and then at home at night. The roles are reversed. In verse 13, she seizes him and kisses him, and with bold face she says to him, etc. The foolish woman is sexually aggressive and shameless. She doesn't care who out there is seeing her behavior and what she's doing and what she's tempting other people to do. Whereas wisdom, she is dressed modestly and she is inviting people to a feast, but not one that has all these other connotations. I think it's the previous chapter where wisdom calls, actually it might be chapter 8 I'm thinking of, I'm not sure. But wisdom calls and says she's built her house and she's inviting you to this banquet. Whereas fools are saying, this water is sweet and this bread is amazing, but there's nothing to it. It's just bread and water. And wisdom is the one who is not advertising more than what she's got. Here's the truth, and here's what it can do for you, and not embellishing it more than it requires.
It also seems like wisdom is not, she's inviting to a banquet, but she's not the main course.
Yeah.
So there's humility and other things going on there. I think that also that points to where the aggressive and shameless person is definitely all the center focus is themselves and their needs and desires.
Yeah, notice that the two appeal to very different kinds of gain. I mean, they're both telling you, here's what you can gain from coming with me. But the adulterous woman is offering you material and physical pleasures. And all those things fade. They all get used up. Whereas the wisdom is calling out and saying, I'm going to give you honor. I'm going to improve your name in the community. And, as long as you continue following the path of wisdom, that value in the name only grows over time, and it will outlast you potentially for many generations. Whereas all of the gold and silver even that you can accumulate in your life, as soon as you're gone, that's all gone too. Somebody else owns it now.
I think what's interesting within this list of things is that those who are foolish will call their foolishness wisdom, and they will call your wisdom foolishness. And they will also, the art of projection is strong with the foolish. And especially if you are motivated to be tempted, you want to indulge your sin nature, that you will be looking for the things that seem to meet that criteria. So she goes out on the street corner and she sees this guy, and if he's been there three times, right? Then, okay, hey, I was waiting for you because I saw you came by a few times. But there's that, hey, I was looking for you, and he's very flattered that she would be looking for him. Wow, okay, I'm cool enough for her to look for. But he wanted to be noticed. You think about where he was, and I mean that's a whole thing, is because there are plenty of times where just living your life, you'll be doing something and you think you're being sincere and faithful, peaceful, meek, kind services, and somebody misconstrues all of your intentions, your actions to mean this wild thing over here, because their heart was not in a place to receive what you were giving as goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a wholly different conversation, but that was, one thing that I was noticing in here is that, let's just give the little guy a benefit of the doubt. Maybe that was his route and he was a messenger, and that was just the way he went back and forth. I don't think that's true, because that's not what the text says. What if? And she comes out, oh, by the way, I was looking for you. You've come by a few times, so you must be looking for me. And, oh, maybe I was, it's one of those pitfalls in interpersonal relationship in the areas of morality where you have to be careful. You have to be wise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just like the utility of fences, or the lack of utility of those personal fences of morality, when you want to give in to temptation, they don't do you any good. People also will see in other people and see in other people's actions and words what they want to see in it, regardless of what's really happening. And that can create its own cascade of problems and lead to those temptations.
He went by more than once, or
that's what it sounds like.
Okay.
In verse 9, it says that, or verses 8 and 9, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. So twilight is when the sun is going down at the horizon. Evening is just after that. And then at the time of night is after sunset, and darkness is the middle of the night. So it seems like he's going past multiple times at the end of the day.
So why is he doing that? It's a curiosity. It's a lustful thing then, right? And then So the proverb is the warning, saying, look, I guess that's what it's all about, right? This is what you're doing. Be aware. These are the consequences, or these are, I guess, some type of warnings of what could possibly happen, or is it?
Yeah, if you're out and you see something that is tempting to you, do you turn around and go past it again, or do you find something else to do? And
unless it's foolish.
Yeah, and this kid took the foolish route and kept going back, and she saw him and took advantage of it. They were both out looking for trouble.
There's a couple of Bible stories that come to mind when reading this Proverbs, and think about Hosea and Gomer, and how, my perspective or my thoughts about Gomer, Hosea would be that he would be a good husband, that he would be a godly husband, but yet his wife still went out because of that inclination that he had, or that she had, sorry, that he knew ahead of time that she had, before he even married her. And I just find that fascinating, just the whole scenario that he was actually instructed to take this woman, knowing that ahead of time. And so I tend to think, because we talked a little bit about, what responsibility would the husband in the Proverbs scenario have in that regard. And I think in a general way, we can recognize that there are definitely things that the husband, that the man can be doing to possibly decrease or even eliminate that temptation, but ultimately it really is still the woman's choice as to whether she goes down that road or goes in that direction. The other Bible story that comes to mind is Joseph with Pharaoh's wife. Potiphar's wife. Yeah. And how, there seems like there's some similarities between her trying to seduce him and this and the woman in Proverbs trying to seduce the man, just pulling out all the stops, but yet ultimately Joseph was not looking for that hookup. He was not looking for that encounter, and his heart was prepared to be able to stand against the temptation and even just run from it, and
Yes.
at great price to himself as well. So
Yeah, there's interesting contrast there. The story of Joseph and Tamar not Joseph and Tamar, Judah and Tamar, and then Joseph and Potiphar's wife are put in parallel in Genesis, so you can contrast the behavior of the two men. But I hadn't really thought about contrasting the behavior of the two women. They're both trying to seduce somebody, but their motivations are both very different, and their perceptions are very different. Potiphar's wife, very much like this woman in Proverbs 7, waited until her husband was away on a business trip or on some kind of trip. He was away from home. But she didn't know her target. She wasn't paying any attention to Joseph. She didn't know anything about him. If she did, she would have known that he was not a vulnerable target, and she would have gone after somebody else. Tamar, on the other hand, she didn't have a husband at the time. She was waiting for a husband. And she was not out looking for trouble. She was out looking for resolution of trouble. But she knew her target. She understood who Judah was. She understood his habits, where he went, what he wanted when he went there. And she set him up. And so that, he's like the bird in this proverb. He flew into her trap and didn't even know there was a trap there until it was already too late.
I kind of want to jump on what Brian was saying about Hosea and Gomer, because that reminds me of reminds me of the father and his people and his bride, because he knew what he was getting into. He knew that we were going to fail, that we were going to be unfaithful. He knew it. So in showing Hosea and Gomer, that kind of reminds me, like, that's like kind of like us, and we're the unfaithful. We're the ones going out doing, because we're sinful, honestly, our thoughts, our words, whatever it is, every day. But we have Yeshua to help us come back, and nobody's perfect, but it's a beautiful thing. That's what when Brian was explaining it, as soon as he mentioned that, it reminded me of the father and us, Gomer and Hosea and Gomer. It's like that's that. And then going back when you were talking about Joseph, yeah, she didn't know him personally. You're right, but she saw him quite a few times, and he was a good-looking man, and he was I don't know. I mean, everybody has their faults, but he did the right thing by running. And sometimes that's all you can do to get away from a situation, and no words need to be spoken.
I was thinking of the thing with Joseph is that, one of the things about his character is that he was pretty much single-minded. I think that we're kind of called to be almost single-minded in the pursuit of God, right? It's something that that's part of the picture of like not being distracted is if you're more single-minded, you're not going to be as distracted. But it makes me kind of think of this time when I was younger and single, where I was really friendly to people, and it just, there were things I understood, fences that I had built for myself, but there were also things that I just didn't really think of a lot of times. And I remember this one time I was at a party, and it was people I worked with, and this guy who I had seen at the hospital, he was a patient, but he was married to a colleague, and like all these people were around, and we're having conversations, and I'd been really friendly to this guy, but I was trying to help him, and wasn't anything to me. But I guess he mistook my friendliness, and he was married to this colleague who was a beautiful woman. And he propositioned me, like people were not far away, but he like propositioned me just straight out. And I was just floored. Like I just didn't even know what to say. And finally I said, what is wrong with you? You have a beautiful wife, you know, and was just like,
Yep,
I mean,
no
I just
shame.
straight out told him like, you're stupid. Like you are an idiot. Like, you know, but it just made me think about how like I was a single person, and I easily could have fallen into a trap. You know, I easily could have fallen for that kind of thing because, oh, this guy's giving me attention or whatever. But he just didn't know who I was. He had no clue what kind of person I was. And I think he really mistook my friendliness for like, oh, I must be interested, I must be open or whatever. And I just thought that was interesting because I think there's something true about how we present ourselves in the public. People who are vulnerable are looking for something. May mistake what they're seeing on the surface and not realize like we're not those people. We're not those kind of people. But I'm sure in that culture it was not. It was a lot easier to tell than in, you know, modern day.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can relate to that because I am so outgoing and so friendly, and I get accusations all the time, and then it hurts because I'm so lovey-dovey. You know,
I believe it.
No, because I got in trouble, and I'm like, what? I'm like, I was confused, and I didn't know better. I guess I'm just too friendly, and I'm kind of afraid because I have a daughter that's like that too. But hopefully she learns from my experience, because I do share my experiences with my family, so they have an understanding. Because what I learned, I want them to learn, and from my mistakes. And so, yeah, I can relate to you. It's weird how I can, but I can, and I can understand where you're coming from as well, because sometimes it does feel that way. Appreciate your comments.
Yeah, I think that's even more true for women than it is for men. You know, you can get yourself into trouble by being overly friendly just because people misinterpret that. But men are much more likely to misinterpret that than women are, especially men who suffer from nice guy syndrome. You know, speaking from personal experience, you're not used to women smiling and being very friendly. So when a woman is very outgoing and friendly like that, it's easy to misinterpret and to think that, you know, she's flirting with you when really she's just being friendly. It takes, you know, it takes some experience with people and a lot of self-awareness and a lot of awareness of how other people behave to be able to interpret those things correctly. And if you don't have the social skills to be able to build that confidence in yourself or in your ability to understand other people, then you're going to set traps for yourself. And unfortunately, other people suffer for it.
I think psychology is something good to get into to have a sense of understanding. Because
Not me.
you're smart. That's why.
One of the commentaries I read was talking about in verse 4, it says, "Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your relative." And they were using that as a kind of, they extrapolated on that this young foolish man would have benefited from a close relationship with a sister or with other women of integrity that were not, you know, trying to make themselves physically or sexually available, obviously, but having those kinds of female relationships are really good safeguards for young men. And I just thought that was such an incredible piece of insight, because that is a piece that is missing often in our society. When you have one or two children, it is very common for siblings to be not close. Everyone's, you know, kind of living their own independent life and all of that. It's less common for people to be close to their siblings than it is for them to be estranged. And I just kind of putting it in that context is that when men know how women are because they're engaging with women that don't tick those she must like me boxes, then it gives them a greater discernment when they are with the women they might be interested in. Unless they're determined to sin and they want to misunderstand, and it, whatever, I can't speak to that. But I do know that I remember when our sons were growing up, I told Brian once, I said, two very different young men. Dylan is very physical. He needs to be touched a lot. He's just that kid that needs hugs and kisses and all of that. And I said, we can give that to him or he'll find it somewhere else. Isaac needed engagement, a lot of verbal dialogue engagement. And it was as pretty much the primary female in their life, I really felt that it was responsibility for me to help them navigate in that realm. But the idea was that I wanted them to be around women of good character. And I tried to model that myself so that when they were confronted with women of poor character, they actually had something to compare it and contrast to.
I used to work with a guy who brought up in a very troubled family, and he had lots of failed relationships himself. And, we worked closely together on a lot of projects. And so, of course, we're always talking about the things that guys talk about when they're working. The thing that really puzzled me is that we were attracted to totally different kinds of women. Physically, character, everything was different. And I never understood it. I understood it in a theoretical level. I could see that there's a particular type of woman that he's attracted to because he's looking for something completely different than I am. And he was looking for this woman in Proverbs 7. And so that's what he saw around him. And he didn't even notice women who didn't fit that target demographic. And for myself, I was repulsed by those women. They held almost no attraction to me at all. And I think it really was about her different upbringings. I grew up in an intact Christian family with great parents, great models of women, both in my mother and in my sisters. He didn't have any of that. His parents were abusive. His mother was all over the place. Sisters hated him. And so he looked for women like his mother and sisters.
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of how, I think that's kind of how it works. When the daughter or son leaves their parents, they want to kind of get with somebody that, it's like when I was a kid, I prayed to God. I didn't know better, but I prayed. I said, God, give me a woman, a wife. If I ever get married, give me a wife who takes care of me, who cleans, cooks, does everything. And he blessed me with it. Now I can't get this woman to stop doing everything. She does everything. But then I took it for granted and not realizing that the blessing is been here, and I just need to do my part. Just as a husband, as a dad, father, all together. And it's a beautiful arrangement, the marriage. But yeah, I thought that's how it's supposed to be because that's how my mom did. She lived a kind of a crazy life, but she also she worked all the time. She was always gone working and taking care of people. And so I thought that's how it's always. I thought one parent does it all. I kind of. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how it's. Sometimes I feel like that. Sometimes I feel kind of bad about it. Sometimes because sometimes I feel like she's doing everything. And I have to kind of have a self-evaluation, make sure I'm doing my part as a.
Yeah, that can be good motivation for building your own character. Little competition isn't always bad.
Husbands should always do more dishes. I'm just saying.
I know that's kind of hard for me, but yeah, I should. You said husbands do dishes.
Oh, yeah, that's like a running joke.
Joseph has 7 dishwashers at home.
Yeah.
Well, not quite 7 yet. That last one's a bit too young. It makes me think about like the conversation that we used to have, Jay, when we were early married. Just that idea of like being motivated to be better for the other person, that whole thing. That's what I can appreciate that.
It's actually a joke for me to tell Brian to do anything in my kitchen, because I generally kick him out as soon as he comes in. It's my space. It's my office. I don't work in your office. You don't work in mine. So that's why it's funny for me to tease him about doing dishes. I had a couple thoughts. One is that this chapter really speaks to the role of men in society to protect and preserve culture. And I know that Solomon is using this as an allegory, metaphor, whatever, to discuss an issue. And so I don't want to take away from that, but I do, I guess. Anytime someone says but, what they really want to say comes after that, and everything before that was just garbage to fill. The role of, you have the king, the husband, and the young man all having roles to play within this culture. And so the king, or the older man who's observing through the lattice in his window, sees this young foolish man going back and forth in front of the prostitute's house, and he does nothing. He just sits there and writes a story about it. He doesn't engage. He doesn't go out and like, hey dude, want to come in for a coffee? We need to talk. The husband, if she is a foreigner, then he's unequally yoked, not with someone who holds the same faith, the same ideals. He apparently has not left her with a household to manage, because if you're managing a household, you don't have time and energy to give to all this other stuff. You're just tired. No kids. He leaves her alone, so there's more of a neglected. So in that, he's not protecting what is happening within his own town, even to know that his wife is untrustworthy, and if he leaves her alone and unprotected, then he's not functioning in a responsible way within his community. He has that responsibility within his community to be wise. And then also the young man is willing to be taken advantage of, has a heart to commit sin, and stays alone in a vulnerable place. And so all of these three, from leadership to home to community, all of these opportunities to preserve and protect their community, their culture, and even this woman to intervene on her behalf, they all failed in that. And I think of that within the body of Messiah. You have a pastor who's seeing things happen and never says anything. He's watching these young men be foolish, and he never says anything. He doesn't take them aside and say, hey, bud. You have husbands that see their wives behaving foolishly, and they're not engaging. They're too busy playing golf or going to work all the time or whatever. They're neglecting that responsibility. And you have young men who are left to their own devices and don't have a heart to be honorable. And it was just, I don't know, that was kind of a broader scale application that I thought was interesting.
Left to their own devices with the internet.
Right.
So there's a parade of stuff going on there. Good luck with that if you're not focused and have a heart to be righteous.